Is 3 a crowd? A two-way fight could prompt a deadlock in Taiwan's elections. Preparing for the worst, Taiwanese conscripts get ready for civil defense drills amid threats from China. Running out of time?
我们一起努力到我的任期的最后一天，大家说好不好？
Taiwan's president wants to right the wrongs of past injustices against indigenous people. And
we're in Phoenix, Arizona to take a look at the American city that's bidding to become a national hub for future-proof technologies.
good evening and welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Leslie Liao with 30 minutes of the latest. Thanks for joining. Starting off with our lead story, presidential hopefuls from Taiwan's two main parties are trading barbs on China. The threat from Beijing shapes every election, but this time there's a twist. The strongest third-party challenger in decades is also in the running. John Van Trieste has this update.
In just over a month, Taiwan will go to the polls, and with each day, the temperature rises. At this rally for Democratic Progressive Party candidate Lai Ching-te, outgoing President Tsai Ing-wen showed up, hoping to help win her party another 4 years. Lai is now doubling down on the issue that hovers over all Taiwan's elections. China claims Taiwan and says it will invade if it has to. And the past 8 years with the DPP in charge have seen things get as tense as most people can remember. Under President Tsai, the party has refused to recognize an unwritten agreement the opposition says helped keep the peace. Under this so-called 1992 consensus, named for the year it was agreed, Taiwan and China recognize themselves as part of one China, even if both sides disagree on what one China means. With that out the window, Beijing's ratcheted up its military threats and hit Taiwan with a string of trade bans. Lai argues his party has led Taiwan away from trade dependence on China, and that if his opponents win, the country will be back under Beijing's economic thumb.
我们的对手都共同喊出重启服贸，他们一个接受9·2共识，一个高喊两岸一家亲，他们都想要让台湾走回依赖中国的老路。
Lai's Kuomintang rival Ho Yo-i hit back at that at a competing rally. He says the DPP's claims it's helped wean Taiwan off its dependence on China aren't true. He cites the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, or ECFA, a KMT negotiated trade deal with China that the DPP has left intact.
民进党现在不是还在ECFA的路吗？而且对ECFA的依赖度也没有减少啊。侯友宜没有走回头路啊。侯友宜就是继续走，让两岸经济大家都能够共好嘛。
But sparring between these two established parties isn't the only focus of attention. For the first time since 2000, Taiwan has a serious third candidate for president, the Taiwan People's Party's Ko Wen-je. Even if, as some recent polls suggest, he's headed for third place, his party could still be a force in the legislature. If things are to get done, the establishment will need his party on board, something he sees as good for the country.
这次应该是20几年来第一次有机会国会3党不够半，我也觉得这样目前整个台湾的政治非蓝即绿，这个还是要打破不然的话，它永远在两极对抗的泥淖。
The KMT and Taiwan People's Party have agreed to work together to win legislative seats. In at least one district, the Kuomintang's not even running a candidate. But the two parties have had a rocky time this campaign season, failing to form a joint ticket. What it all comes down to is this. China, as ever, looms large. But Taiwan also needs to consider a question it hasn't had to in years. What happens if a two-way fight becomes a three-way deadlock? Alex Chen and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
More local officials in Taiwan are suspected of organizing tours to China in the run-up to January's elections. The concern is over Beijing's influence on the vote. Taipei city councilors say they've received several complaints that neighborhood chiefs have been inviting people to join cheap trips to China. Some of the visits are thought to be funded by the Chinese government, with prosecutors investigating whether they are part of efforts to influence Taiwan's elections. Chinese officials are suspected of using the visits to try and persuade attendees to vote for certain candidates. Taiwan's new wave of one-year conscripts will start their service in just over a month. It's part of President Tsai Ing-wen's military restructuring plan focused on more realistic training and civil defense. Jaime Okan explains.
Rescuing people from a bus crash. This is just one of several civil defense exercises held by the military and local governments every year. It's part of the country's efforts to better prepare for emergencies like accidents, natural disasters, and war. Starting next year, Taiwan's conscripts will be focusing more on civil defense, spending up to 80 hours training to deliver emergency relief.
所以民安演习或者民安相关的训练，可以说是让这个作战跟紧急救难、救灾、天灾地变，当部队要动的时候，民间要动的时候，怎么样整合一个最大的资源。
In light of China's growing aggression against Taiwan and threats to invade the country, Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen announced a military restructuring plan last year. The biggest change was to mandatory military service, which was extended from 4 months to 1 year. But the reforms also include plans to increase the number of active troops, plans to deploy conscripted troops to positions that better protect infrastructure, the establishment of a civil defense system for medical and emergency relief, and plans to upgrade reservist programs to provide additional troops. Analysts say these plans are supposed to give conscripts more realistic training and focus their skills in areas where the country needs the most help.
在遭逢紧急危难的时候，不管是战争灾害或者是天然灾害，那这些受过兵役训练的国民都可以协助个人、家庭、社会乃至于国家进行各种防卫任务。
The first batch of one-year conscripts will start their training at the end of January. The hope is that these new recruits will be able to get the training needed to defend the country in any emergency. Qingshan and Jaime Okan for TaiwanPlus.
The Philippines has reported hundreds of Chinese vessels at a reef near the island nation. The vessels are believed to be manned by China's maritime militia and part of the country's gray zone tactics. Those refer to aggressive activities that are just short of war. The Philippine Coast Guard deployed 2 vessels to monitor the situation. There has been no immediate comment from China's embassy in Manila. President Tsai Ing-wen opened an Indigenous Justice Committee meeting today. She is the first president to apologize to Taiwan's indigenous people for mistreatment by the government. She established the committee in 2016, nearing the end of her final term. She says she remains hopeful that cooperation can continue between the government and indigenous people.
政府部门要跟原住民族来持续对话，所有的委员，也就是我们一起努力到我的任期的最后一天，大家说好不好？
As President Tsai's administration comes to an end, our reporter Tiffany Wong spoke with an indigenous legislative candidate to see what could be next on the road for indigenous transitional justice in Taiwan.
Now, Taiwan has been undergoing a period of transitional justice, which is mostly to hold the government accountable for the atrocities that happened during the White Terror or martial law period in Taiwan. And what does this mean to you, and what does this mean to indigenous people?
那原住民族的转型正义比较特别的地方在于，就是我们在谈的不是特定的个人受害，而是整个族群，在台湾的原住民各个族群在相同的历史背景之下受到就是来自就是国家政权的压迫跟侵害。那举例来讲会有哪一些呢？就是第一个包括说语言的流失，就是我们在日本时代被强迫讲日语，到了国民政府时代被强迫讲中文，那以至于在白色恐怖在威权时期的压力之下，我们很多的长辈他们现在已经没有能力传承族语给像我们这一代或是比我们还要小的下一代。那另外还有一个就是大家原住民族社会非常关注就是土地的问题。那我们都很清楚说在日本时期的时候，所有的土地被收归国有，但事实上这些土地上面是有我们的族群在上面生活跟生存。
So how do you think indigenous people and the Taiwanese government can work together to affect transitional justice for indigenous people?
我觉得当然就是在蔡英文总统执政的这个快要满8年的这个期间我们其实看见有蛮多的开始谈论。 那个开始谈论其实是很重要的，可是那个开始谈论并没有实质的落实在相关的程序立法或者是相关的权力推进的这些步骤上面，甚至其实在这8年的期间，我们也看见有一些我们很关心的，比如说土地的问题，还有在原基法里面的资商同意权的问题，那其实这些事情都非常非常可惜，因为我想先不论下一任的总统是谁，但是在蔡英文之前的所有的总统，事实上都没有他做到的实质的部分这么多。但是你可以看见，就是他已经比大家都进步很多了。可是对于原住民族社会来讲，我们还是觉得就是整体的真正的那个推进那个权力进展的那个力量还是太小，而且速度也太慢了。
That was our reporter Tiffany Wong speaking with High Plains Indigenous legislative hopeful Savongan. The U.S. state of Arizona has received a once-in-a-generation windfall of federal funding to make homegrown chips. Big-time foreign investors have begun pouring in billions, most notably Taiwanese chip giant TSMC. Our reporter Joyce Tseng traveled to Phoenix to check in on the progress.
Landing in the Arizona desert. That's what many tech companies have decided to do. A huge slice of nearly $200 billion to grow the American semiconductor industry has ended up here, in the southwestern Grand Canyon state. That sum is largely accounted for by world-leading Taiwanese chipmaker TSMC, which has put in one of the biggest foreign investments the U.S. has ever seen. Also here, the world's second largest chipmaker, the U.S.'s own Intel, which is adding 2 new factories despite industry concerns of shortages in resources like water and talent.
The momentum has shifted, and we are doing everything remotely possible to continue producing in the U.S. as we've done for 50 years, and we don't believe there are going to be any barriers to production in the American markets.
Chips power all modern electronics, from kitchen appliances to defense systems. That's why U.S. President Joe Biden's been pushing to make more advanced chips in America, to secure an economic and technological lead over fellow superpower China. Most of the world's cutting-edge chips are currently made in Taiwan, the self-ruled nation Beijing claims as its own and has threatened to take by force. It's a flashpoint that could disrupt the global chip supply chain, and why some companies are physically moving to set up shop near key customers like TSMC and Intel to keep their businesses resilient.
If there's geopolitical tensions, if there's challenges with the shipping channels, getting from Asia to here, being local, that's a risk that you can eliminate. Being close is the best way to reduce some of those business continuity risks.
For Germany-owned chips equipment supplier EMD Electronics, mitigating that risk means a new $39 million plant near the state's capital, Phoenix, close to big players like TSMC and Intel. It's also an area others in the industry have scouted out for its promising workforce. With just a little over 1.6 million people, Phoenix is the 5th most populous city in the United States, and that number is expected to rise as officials are bidding to make this a national hub for technologies from semiconductors to electric vehicles and energy storages that are future-proof. Arizona's labor force is strong and has a lot of potential to grow, says Greater Phoenix Area Economic Council head Chris Camacho. Speaking on whether the desert state is the best place for the water-intensive chips industry, Camacho said water planning has been a state priority for decades. Now there's a chance to redirect this resource from traditional industries like agriculture towards fields that can elevate the state.
When I talk to global media about the use of water for semiconductors versus agriculture, we're going to bet all day long on investing in semiconductor plants because they create high-quality jobs. They naturally create a lot of innovation, but also a lot of tax revenue for our communities. This is going to be the next hub of major technology convergence in the entire United States. Is going to happen here, in large part because TSMC is here.
Many are eager to see the unmatched chipmakers' Phoenix project come to life. It's already delayed by a year, but it remains a driving force behind Arizona's bid to lead future trends. To get there, the state is working to pull in firms across high-tech fields beyond TSMC to unlock advanced innovation in this vast, promising desert land. Justin Wu and Joyce Tseng in Phoenix, Arizona for TaiwanPlus.
For a closer look at TSMC in Arizona, tune in tomorrow as Joyce Tseng reports from the high-stakes Phoenix construction site. Moving on to sports news, Taiwan beat South Korea 4-0 in the first game of the 30th Asian Baseball Championship. Taiwan's starting pitcher Xu Ruoxi held South Korea scoreless through 7 innings and logged 10 strikeouts. Meanwhile, Team Taiwan's hitters combined for 10 hits, scoring 4 runs in the 3rd and 4th innings. The competition kicked off on Sunday at the newly opened Taipei Dome. The teams of 8 countries are participating in the tournament, which runs until December 10th. A centuries-old industry that many no longer have the stomach for coming up. We bring you stories from Taiwan.
Every day of the week.
Our reporters travel the nation.
Exploring the issues that matter to you.
News from here in Taiwan and around the world.
What's up, Taiwan? On TaiwanPlus.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Islamic State militants have claimed responsibility for a deadly blast at a university in the Philippines. Louise Watt reports.
Wounded at a religious occasion, the survivors were attending Sunday Catholic Mass at a university gym in the southern Philippines when a bomb went off, killing at least 4 people and leaving scores injured.
Nung una po, nagkakanta na kasi kami tapos may biglang pumutok sa likod namin. Akala ko nung una speaker lang po talaga yun. Tapos biglang nagtakbuhan na yung iba. Ako, yung kasama ko, medyo nadapa pa kami. Tapos sabi ko na, Art, tumakbo ka talaga. Kaya yun na po talaga yung naalala ko na.
The deadly attack happened in Marawi, a Muslim-majority city in the predominantly Catholic country. Islamic militants briefly seized the city in 2017 and have aligned themselves with the Islamic State group, which has now taken responsibility for the explosion. The Philippines government has vowed to bring those responsible to justice.
To foment confusion, chaos is a prime indicia of a terrorist activity.
The blast followed a series of military operations against local insurgents. Security in the area is being strengthened as police and soldiers clamp down on a resurgence of militant violence. Devon Tsai and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Agnes Chow says she is now in Canada and will likely never return home. A student activist made the announcement on social media, her first public statement since she was released from prison in Hong Kong in June of 2021. She had served 10 months for unlawful assembly. Chow had gone to Canada in September to study. She says police surveillance after her release caused mental health issues, and she has decided not to return to Hong Kong for her own safety. Rescue efforts to find 12 climbers missing after a volcanic eruption in Indonesia have been suspended. Mount Merapi in West Sumatra erupted on Sunday, leaving at least 11 people dead. The popular hiking spot is one of Indonesia's most active volcanoes. Its eruption sent ash and smoke more than 3,000 meters into the air, blanketing local villages and blocking the sun. Local authorities say 75 climbers were on the mountain at the time of the eruption. Several were rushed to the hospital with injuries. Israeli forces are pushing into southern Gaza. It comes after days of heavy bombardment of the enclave following the end of a week-long ceasefire. Gaza's health ministry says more than 15,000 people have been killed in the Hamas-controlled territory in the last 2 months. Israel's military launched offensives on Gaza following a cross-border attack by Hamas on October 7th, which killed 1,200. Our reporter Rick Lauert spoke to emergency doctor Sang Kai-hong with Doctors Without Borders, also known as MSF, who recently returned from working in Gaza.
Since you've got back and you've been talking to media here in Taiwan, you've called for a ceasefire. There was a pause, a truce between Israel and Gaza, and that's now collapsed. Can you tell us why you were calling for a ceasefire?
From the perspective as a doctor or from the perspective of a medical humanitarian organization, it's nonsense that we stay in the hospital and we tried our best to save 1 or 5 or 10 lives, to do our best to save them. But at the same time, the war is still happening and hundreds of thousands of people are still dying. I think it's unacceptable and it's nonsense for a doctor. So I think the ceasefire is essential.
And one thing we've been hearing from reports of Gaza is the Israeli attacks on hospitals. Can you tell us what you know about these?
Since the start of the war, according to the statistics of WHO, it's over 100 accidents of attacking the medical facility. MSF, we have our own medical facility in a hospital called Al-Auda. It's in north part of Gaza. This place was also attacked, and 4 of our staff died from this accident. Even before the attack, they are doing the operation, they are treating the patients inside of the hospital. So I have no any idea, and I cannot think of any reason why this place, the international neutral organization, independently operated medical facility would be targeted. And I think this should be further investigated.
Can you tell us a bit about what you saw in terms of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, in terms of their medical needs? What sort of situations were you seeing from the people there?
Even only the first or the second week of the outbreak of the war, there's almost no any medications. We need to suture the patient without any local anesthesias because we run out of the medication. So we have 2 children. They are older sisters and younger brothers. Their house was bombed, so all of the other families are died, and they are no more than 10-year-old, and both of them need amputation because the injury of the limbs. But we run out of the local anesthesias, so we have to do the operation for both of them. And the older sister, she has to hold his younger brothers. I mean, it's this kind of suffering or pain, it's unnecessary for us. We can do more to prevent this kind of tragedy.
That was emergency doctor with MSF Sang Kai-hong speaking to reporter Rick Lauert. The head of the United Nations says promises made by the fossil fuel industry fall short of what is needed to curb climate change. That comes after oil and gas companies at the COP28 climate summit said they would end methane emissions by 2030. Antonio Guterres says the pledge is a step in the right direction, but offers no plan for reaching net zero emissions by 2050. Scientists hope the talks in Dubai will end in pledges to phase out all fossil fuels, but the COP28 president chairing the talks appears resistant to this idea, saying there is no science behind it. As South Korea moves closer to banning the consumption of dog meat, farmers and restaurant owners are pushing back against the threat to their livelihoods. Bryn Thomas has the story.
It's a centuries-old industry, but one that many in South Korea no longer have a stomach for. The country is expected to ban the consumption of dog meat early next year. The popularity of a Korean tradition has nosedived in recent years, and a ban is expected to pass with bipartisan support. Animal rights activists in the country are hailing it as a victory, but for some 2,000 business owners in the dog meat industry, it's a massive blow.
그냥 이대로 폐업이 된다면 내 삶은 진짜 그냥 어떻게 볼까 지금 이 경제적 수준에서 도저히 어떻게 해볼 수 있는 답이 안 나오는 것 같습니다.
그동안 30년을 장사하다가 갑자기 3년 유예를 줄 테니까 그때부터 3년 안에 정리 기한을 줄 테니까 하지 말아라 한다는 것은 너무 불합리하다는 생각이 절실합니다.
They're not alone. Protesters have taken to the streets in Seoul, calling on the government to throw them a bone. Lawmakers say the proposed ban does make provision for those who make a living from dog meat.
개를 식용 목적으로 사육을 하거나 도살을 하거나 유통을 하거나 판매를 하는 행위 이런 것 등을 금지시키는 게 골자고요. 또 아까 말씀드린 대로 이런 개 식용이 금지됨에 따라서 피해를 입는 업종들에 대한 구체적인 전업 대책을 세워야 된다 하는 이런 걸 법에 담습니다.
But some say easing the transition of farmers and restaurateurs fails to get to the meat of the issue. They say the government has no right to tell them what to eat.
우리 국민들이 먹는 음식을 하루 아침에 이렇게 먹지 못하게 한다는 거는 이거는 뭐 공산주의 국가죠, 그죠? 그래서 저는 앞으로도 이게 좋은 식자재이기 때문에 이게 계속 유통이 돼서 영업을 한다라고 하면은 몸에 좋은 음식이니까 계속 먹을 용의는 있습니다.
Although many inside and outside South Korea welcome the ban, they may struggle to teach old dog eaters new tricks. Howard Chang and Bryn Thomas for TaiwanPlus.
It's the third and final day of the Qingshan Temple pilgrimage, one of Taipei's 3 biggest religious ceremonies. The pilgrimage is meant to celebrate the birthday of the deity King Qingshan. He's believed to be able to ward off illness and drive away evil spirits. The ceremony dates back over a century and is recognized as one of Taipei City's intangible cultural assets. The event typically spans 3 days, with the first 2 pilgrimages taking place at night and the last at midday. And that just about does it for this edition of Taiwan Plus News. Remember to check out Taiwan Plus's website or social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, before I leave you today, footage from a sculpture exhibition in northern Spain celebrating Spanish artist Eduardo Chillida. I'm Leslie Liao signing off. Take care, and I'll see you next time.